You are listening to the Practicing the Art of Small Business podcast with Shannyn Merlo and Julie Parker. Join their conversation about business, leadership, and the self-awareness journey to greater success.
Welcome, Julie. Welcome, listeners, to episode number 29 of Practicing the Art of Small Business. Julie, as always, how is life, love, health, happiness?
Tick, 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 tick. All is fabulous. Thanks so much for asking, Shannyn. How's everything in your world?
Look, you know what? I'm alive, I'm upright, I'm breathing, I have money, I have health, I have wealth, my cat's still alive. Yeah, I know she's turning 21 in December, so every day is a good day when you got small cat. So I cannot be grumpy. I cannot be grumpy. That's really not a very optimistic.
So I can only be happy.
I love a mixed metaphor and an oxymoron.
I do.
One thing that you often reflect back to me, whether you want to or not, Julie, is this idea about having responsibility for our happiness, that we can choose to be responsible for our happiness, or we could choose not to be responsible for our happiness, but ultimately we have to be responsible. And it's kind of been a little bit of a theme that's been coming up in some work I've been doing, and I wondered whether we could talk about this idea, which we've touched on a number of times, but around responsibility, around blaming others, around locus of control, and we can kind of chat through all of that sort of stuff. What do you think about that today, Julie?
I love it. What a tremendous topic.
Love a topic. So I want to, for those who have not seen us on the YouTubes, please do see us on the YouTubes. I think that we're more entertaining, and when I do the show notes, I watch us fast, so we sound like chipmunks and we're moving a little bit faster. But for those who are going to be watching us on the tubes, I'm going to be looking up to my left, because what I have there is a little picture, which we can actually put in the downloads, the resources section, which is about above the line and below the line thinking and cause and effect. And so I think that we'll be coming back to this as we talk through that. The cause and effect, we can either be the cause of our reality or we can be at effect of everything that's happening to us.
Happening to us. Oh, talk about not take responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people do feel this way, don't they? It reminds me of Tony Robbins' quote, that if you some people move through their life thinking life is happening to them. Other people move through their life thinking life is happening for them. Even the tricky stuff is for our betterment, for our empowerment, for our learning and growth development.
I think what's interesting about this concept is it is something that you can learn. And I think that learning to have the idea that we are the cause of our lives is very empowering. This concept is something that can be learned. And I had a feeling that I might have first learned this through what's the book called? It's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in that book, there's a passage, and I do remember when I learnt this because it was so profound to me. I was being bullied at the time. I was in a workplace. It was about 20 years ago. Yeah, really joyful experience.
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't have the quote, and I'll see if I can find it at some stage, but that no one is responsible for our feelings. We can't be emotional unless we're choosing to have that emotion, which really resonated with me, that whatever was happening externally to me, I could change the way that I responded to that. And this person didn't have control of my emotions. I got to choose how I responded to what was going on. Now, it didn't change the situation. The person was still a insert relative word. But I actually was able to let go of the attachment to the challenges that were there and kind of almost be a little bit stand backish. It's almost like you no longer have power over me because you can't make me feel anything. And I found that really empowering. And I wonder, like with that cause and effect, there's value there.
That's wonderfully empowering. And I think we've got the opportunity to experiment with the way we feel around that just with social media. If, goodness knows, I love to put controversial things up on social media, and I do disassociate myself from the responses. I post it and then I run away. I don't look at the responses, and I find that empowering because I noticed at the start when I would post something and somebody would challenge me on what I'd posted, that I would then spend like a crazy amount of time contemplating what my response could be. You know, if I was going to respond, I would say this, and then I'd say that, and then an hour later I'd think, oh, I could say this. And I know of another person who is very accomplished in their life, highly successful, self-aware, posts things on social media, and then contacts her friends and says, and colleagues, can you support my post because somebody has said something bad about it? And so insecurity around that can run deep into many different channels and different people's lives. But it's a lovely opportunity to start to learn how to disassociate yourself from others' input, because you're absolutely right. We choose the way we feel. We choose to place a particular meaning on other people's feedback around certain things. And it is a lovely thing to master in this world, because otherwise we are at the mercy of everything around us.
Yeah, and that's a really fantastic point around the word that comes up for me. And again, looking at my little picture, when we feel like we're at the mercy of others, it is quite it's a bit of a victim mentality. And this is a word that I think can be difficult for some people to associate with. And I say this as someone who has had to move away from a victim mentality myself. There are times where I've realized, like, I'm playing the victim here. Like when we choose to play the victim in our situations, and I'm choosing my language very carefully because we choose to play the victim, the opposite of choosing to play the victim is to be the hero in our story, or to be the victor in our story, and to say, how do I move from this place of disempowerment, of feeling like I don't have control and feeling like I'm out of control and feeling like others are controlling me or the situation, to how do I be the hero in my own journey? How do I take control of this situation? How do I take control of my emotions so that I get a better outcome? And so it's really about shifting the mindset between what we can control and what we can't control. And we can't control others. I mean, I don't think anyone's tried yet. I mean, plenty of people try to control other people, but it doesn't work. I think one of the beautiful things of the journey I've been on is learning, especially in coaching, is you can't coach someone who's not in the room.
Oh, nice one. Love it. Oh, yes.
You can't change someone unless they're willing, and you can't change that person. That person has to be prepared to change themselves. So you can only change yourself. And this has been coming up because there's been some leaders that I've been working with who've been feeling quite disempowered. And so it's really about shifting that frame around, well, what do you have control over? What actions can you take? What emotions can you choose that's different to what you've got at the moment?
Oh, yeah. For sure. There was a quote that I read just over the last few days, Shannyn. May I read it to you? It may resonate.
Yes, Julie, you are free to read anything that you think is going to add value in our podcast, because I can't control you. You can control me, though, when you edit, because you can edit me out. So, I mean...
Yeah, that's it. I have control. That's for sure. This is how the quote goes. Nobody is coming to rescue you. Your feelings don't matter in the real world. The only person who can save you is you. Get up and make things happen. And that first line there was, I remember the years in my life, my kind of late teens years of my life, where I discovered that, because I think we do. We grow up, I mean, look at our lives. We grow up with our parents saving us when we fall. They're always there for advice. They're always there to say, yeah, that's right, it's not fair, that shouldn't have happened. They're there to love and nurture us. But maybe one of the things that they also bring to the party with that is that there is someone there to save you and rescue you. And when you start to go into adulthood, part of our resistance around the difficult stuff is when we sit back and say, but it's not fair. And we subconsciously, I know that I was like this in relationships. You know, I would be a person in my youthful relationships that would act in a certain way to then garner a rescuing response from the other person I was with. And when you start to recognise that, you start to recognise, gosh, I think when it all comes down to it, I am waiting for that thing, that person, even, if you are Christian, God to come in and make it all right again, rather than take that power within ourselves and say, I don't like this, I'm going to plan for something better, I'm going to make sure that happens. I think a lot of us do think, gosh, that someone's going to sweep in and save us, because it's just not fair the way it is.
There are two things I want to say about that quote. One, do you know where that came from? Who the quoter?
I closed down my Facebook so it didn't throw a little recording down. Let me just quickly check.
Okay. Yeah. While you're bringing that up, I'm going to ask you to reread it. And for anyone who is listening, I would love you to just take a moment and just notice if there's any punch to the guts as you hear it. Because I think there definitely, if there is this, I feel uncomfortable saying this victim mentality, because it's not that powerful. There's lots of us out there, and I'm putting myself in this box, there's lots of us out there who want to be rescued, but it is that victim mentality of, I'm waiting for someone to make it better. And if this quote resonates, then there's something within you that's holding you back. And the beauty of this experience is to realize that you're holding yourself back. You're the one who's going to be able to rescue you. And once you've read that quote, I want to add something around rescuing in business. So,
okay,
listeners, take a knee while Julie reads the quote again.
Nobody is coming to rescue you. Your feelings don't matter in the real world. The only one who can save you is you. So get up and make things happen. No one's going to come and rescue me. What are you talking about? I've got to do this by myself. I don't feel skilled enough to do it.
And this is what the next bit that I wanted to talk about with regard to business. We, as you and I know, Julie, we are employed by people to help them in their business.
Correct, that is our job.
I knew I was doing something. The hardest person to coach is the person who says, it's your fault that my business isn't any better. And I've only had, back in my day, I was a little bit less selective of who I brought on board, because when I'm qualifying a client, one of the things I listen for is the language of, I know that I'm responsible to make this change. I know that this is not your job. I know that you can't control the outcome of this. And that to me is like, great, I am the sage or I am the guide, but this business owner knows that they're the hero in the story, that if their business is going to turn around or if they're going to fix the problem, they are the ones who have to be on the bus to fix the problem. And anyone who turns that and kind of outsources responsibility to the sage or the guide is outsourcing their own responsibility, which puts them back in that victim mode. It's everyone else's fault that I have this problem, but it's not my fault. Therefore, it's not my fault. I'm not in control. I'm not responsible.
That's exactly right. And it makes me think about our past episode, just the number 28, about fear of failure, fear of success. And I wonder whether, and I'm sure one of the reasons why anyone would possibly have a client say, this one was not my fault, this one was somebody else's fault, is because they are so uncomfortable with failure of themselves that I cannot take responsibility for that and be the one at fault. It must be somebody else's fault because I cannot see myself as a failure because it's too uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so if we have a client that quite unaware of the fact that they are so uncomfortable with failure, then if anything happens that is considered then a failure, it can't be my fault because I can't see myself as a failure, because if I see myself as a failure, that's a very bad thing. So therefore it must be somebody else's fault, and that's when you're pushing the blame onto others.
Again, I'm looking at my little picture, and I think, again, goes back to one of our previous episodes around what keeps us stuck. This idea of this staying in that space of fear of failure or fear of moving forward or fear of change, and the building of the resilience over that, is we can either stay stuck in where we're at, or we can realise that we do have choice here. A lot of the time where we feel like we need to outsource to others, there's no other way of dealing with this. It's their fault. I'm doing what I'm doing. I can't change anything. It's a very stuck feeling. It's a very stuck mentality. But when we open up and realise that there are choices here, then there is freedom to it. I think what keeps us stuck in that moment of sort of that below the line thinking of I'm stuck, I have no choice, or I'm in fear, it's that we don't like the consequences of the choices that we are currently seeing, and we don't necessarily want to be open to other choices that are there, or we're not prepared, the pain of where we are stuck in, we're not prepared to have the consequence of a different choice, because that consequence of a different choice is actually more painful than the pain that we're in at the moment, and that helps us to stay where we are. And outsourcing our responsibility to others, again, allows us to stay in that painful spot, but the pain of actually staying where we are is less than the pain of a different choice or outcome. What do you think of that very esoterical, poorly explained concept, Julie?
It was explained very well, and the thing that came through my mind was, aren't we ridiculous, you know?
Humans, oh yeah, we are weirdos.
We live our lives so averse to what makes sense and what is logical, isn't it? And it's these core beliefs that we have around what attachment, what meaning do we have, or do we hold on, what meaning do we attach to certain things that help propel us through life. What's the meaning we attach to change? What's the meaning we attach to success? What's the meaning we attach to failure? What's the meaning we attach to mistakes? What's the meaning we attach to having concepts delivered to us that we know nothing about, therefore we have to be in an incompetent space to be able to learn those things. And we resist so much of the journey of life. You ask anybody, do you want to remain where you are right now, or do you want to grow and develop? Everyone surely would say, I want to grow and develop. Do you want to do what's required to grow and develop? Oh, no. I'd rather really just be comfortable. And one of the biggest not taking responsibility things, and I had a conversation with somebody just yesterday, and she's glorious, a dear, dear person, and again, wildly successful person as well, and she was going through a difficult thought process. And I suggested, why don't you do this? And she said, yeah, it just takes so much effort though, doesn't it? So I would rather remain uncomfortable than go to effort. And one of those classic phrases that you and I always hear, and many people hear, is, but it's too hard. And that is one of the things that you and I, as consultants and coaches that go into work environments and suggest opportunities for change, suggest strategies that may propel them to more success. One of the things that I get is, but there's no time, but it's really hard, but I won't be able to get my team on board, but. And it is about, as a human being, if you desire the success, then you cannot stop the thinking process at, but it's too hard, in whatever way it is, but it's just too hard. That's the tipping point. If you tip over that, but it's too hard, but I'm going to do it anyway, but it's too hard, but I'm sure there's strategies around it. That's the tipping point. You've got to push past that repetitive thought that stops us from progressing.
I think going back, because the last episode, I just did the show notes on episode number 22, resilience, and I was reflecting on the resilience thing. I think it's okay to actually say, right now it's a bit challenging and I may not have the emotional energy to deal with this right now. And it's actually, I think, one of my coping strategies is to slow down a little bit and to go to ground a little bit. And so I think sometimes having self-care around those times is okay, but the giving up is the challenge. I think it's okay to actually say, you know what, I just need to rebuild. You know, almost like a bear going into hibernate. I just need to hibernate for a day or two, get my energies back up so that I can rise above, and I can now start taking choices or making choices that are difficult, but currently it's difficult. So it's choose. There's a quote, and I don't know who it is, but it's like choose your difficult, choose your
hard.
Choose your heart.
It's hard to stop eating when you love food. It's hard to stick to a diet. It's hard to exercise every day. But it's also hard to be obese. So choose your heart.
Yeah, yeah. In our pre-recording conversation, we talked about control and choice and happiness. And I wanted to share a quote from a book that I'm listening to, and I would love if you shared about the freedoms that you talked about with attachment to things and choices around attachment and what we attach to. Would that be cool, Julie?
That'd be cool.
Great. So I am currently audiobook listening to The Psychology of Money, and it is very, very good, very easy to listen to. And one of the things that they talk about in the book is that more than your salary, this is a direct quote, more than your salary, more than the size of your house, more than the prestige of your job, control over doing what you want, when you want to, with the people you want to, is the broadest lifestyle variable that makes people happy. So this idea of when we feel like we've got freedom of control or freedom of choice, that actually does give us happiness, and there's research that backs that up. And I think that when we're in that disempowered feeling state where we feel like we've got no choice, we feel trapped. But it is really this, I think it's the attachments that we have to where we are right now, whether it's because it's safe or that it's too hard to consider the change, or that the cost of changing is actually more than the success of the change, is what kind of keeps us in this place, which then drains our happiness. And you shared a beautiful analogy of your experience around attachment to things that drove happiness and freedom. Do you want to talk us, give us something from the Julie School of Life archives?
Yes. Take a seat, get a cup of tea, let me take a little journey.
I'm going to take a leg off, as I like to say.
Take a leg off. But in essence, that is taking a load off as well. Your leg is quite weighty. The thing that I was mentioning was in my first marriage, my marriage to Charles is my second marriage. I was married before for nearly 10 years. I think it was nearly 10 years. And this is not to say anything negative about their marriage at all, but when the end of a marriage comes up, you do tend to want to move on swiftly into post marriage life, because it can all be very traumatic. I mean, I think the happiest of couples would find it emotionally draining and traumatic to go through divorce and separation of stuff, and you don't get to see your in-laws anymore, and the friendships go to one side or the other, all the stuff that goes along with that process. And while I was married in the first marriage, we were doing all the usual things that couples do. We want to try to make sure that we're getting good, healthy incomes. We both had our separate businesses that we were trying to develop up. We had our first home. We then bought our second home, keeping the first one as an investment property, having holidays, buying cars, replacing cars, doing all the things that you think you need to do in order to build a life, to make you feel like that you're progressing and that you're successful. And it's just all stuff. That's all the stuff side of a marriage. And you work hard for the stuff, and you put a lot of thought and planning into the stuff, especially when you're talking about buying homes and all the rest of it. And when it came time for that marriage to end, the value that I placed on starting my new life, making sure that I was moving towards a peaceful life with free of any conflict that was going to be inevitable while we were trying to split up the stuff, my value around that was so much stronger, I recognised in that moment, than my attachment to the stuff. And so I found it remarkably easy to not care about the stuff. If the stuff was going to cause conflict, if me trying to hang on to any of the stuff, the house, the cars, the contents within the house, that was going to cause conflict. That was going to maintain that connection to old life. I placed very little value on that in comparison to the forward-thinking future life, being free of all of that kind of conflict. And so I found it remarkably easy to let go of the stuff, because the attachment to it diminished because of the value that I had in everything else, the freedom, the future life.
And I think that's a really... Thank you for sharing that story, number one. And I think the lesson from there for me is, if we are feeling out of control, or we're feeling like a bit of a victim, or we're blaming others for where we're at, think about what we're attached to that's holding us there. Because it might actually be stuff. It might be that in order to change, I've got to be prepared to change my life. I've got to be prepared to walk away from this person. I've got to be prepared to walk away from this thing. I've got to be prepared to change the way that I think. I've got to be prepared to let go of this idea that someone was going to come around and rescue me. If we let go of the attachment to that, then there is really the only opportunity to move forward. And when I say the only opportunity is to move forward, well, you can't go backwards. You can't relive that past life. Hopefully, if we do it better this round, then we'll have grown and we'll have leveled up to the next level, and we will have grown and we will have a new, bigger challenge to deal with after that.
Yeah, that's it. Because given my example, the stuff didn't change. One day it was important to me, and the next day it wasn't important to me. But the stuff didn't change, the circumstance changed, and the way I perceived it changed, the meaning I attached to it changed. And we have the power to change the meaning that we attach to all sorts of things in our life. And I mentioned earlier to you, Shannyn, before we started recording, that Janis Joplin song, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. And that can be a very empowering thing, especially as a business owner, to think to yourself, gosh, if I do lose everything, if I do fail resoundingly and everything goes, our normal thought process is that's a terrible thing. I must resist it with every part of my being. But if you shifted the core belief around that and thought, gosh, everything could go, I could fail with all of this and it just all dissipates into nothing, but I'd be free because there's nothing left to lose. Now I'm truly free.
We're jumping around a lot on this podcast episode, but I think it's kind of fun. This is this is why we started it, so I make no apologies to those who are listening. But what came up for me when you said that, Julie, is this attachment to identity. If I lost everything, so as you were talking, I was like, if I lost everything, then where would I be? Who would I be? And so, again, it just reinforce this idea that I'm attached to this idea of who I think I am and what success means to me as a human. And if I am okay with change, if I'm okay with the uncertainty, if I'm okay with letting go of the attachment to where I am, then and be comfortable that I can reinvent the meaning that I have to it, then I don't have to be attached, so I don't have to be afraid, and so I can just walk forward, walk on. What's that song? Yeah. Walk on with hope in your heart.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right, because it is when we have any kind of attachment, and what I mean by that is that if I had that thing or that success or that person, then I would feel happier, more successful, feel loved, feel validated, feel like I was moving on well with my life. And if I didn't have these things, then I wouldn't have those sort of things. And so now I'm going to try to control those things to make them keep in my life. We are enormously vulnerable when we place at the highest order of our values an attachment to the things around us that we actually either don't have control over or shouldn't have control over. No, one person should not have control over another person. And the things that we can't control are, will my business survive? Will I keep my house? What if, all the stuff around me as well? We can't control friendships. We don't know. It's all very random. A lot of the stuff is random. A lot of the stuff changes without our direct impact. And if our identity is made up of the things that we have no control over, we are holding ourselves very vulnerably in our life.
Well, Julie, I think that this episode brings together a lot of concepts of kind of foundational personal development. And so I want to see if I can wrap this one up as a bit of a shorter episode. And I'm going to get you to read that quote out again, because I think it is just so powerful. And it's powerful because if it kicks you, if it hurts to hear it, then there's something in you that is controlling you around those words. And so use that as a basis of change, of exploring what a future is where you're not being controlled by what you're currently being controlled by.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could throw in two things before we summarise.
Yeah.
One is, and that means. So I heard this recently from a marketing guy here in the dental space, and it helps you articulate your message to your audience in terms of your marketing. So we have great technology. That doesn't mean anything to a patient. And so answer the, and that means that the treatment of the patient is going to be whatever, bells and whistles on it. But I think it works very well with this. But it means I'll fail, but I'll lose the thing, but this thing may happen. And to ask yourself that next question. And that means, and we have in the past spoken about the Japanese why 5 times. Ask why 5 times to get to the root cause, the root belief that's going on for you. I think continuing to ask, and that means, but that means I fail. And that means Well, it means I feel bad about myself. I look terrible in front of other people. And that means, and that means, and that means. And so I think the and that means could help people shift through and recognise that there are attachment to stuff, for example, but I might lose my car. And that means that I lose my prestige. And that means, so it may help with a thought process.
I actually love that.
And the other thing, one of the, again, when I reflect back over first marriage, and we have so much emotional and spiritual attachment to the stuff that happened in the marriage. And while we're in the marriage, we're focusing on the good and the bad. Once the marriage is gone, sometimes, maybe it's a coping process of having that end, you tend to focus on the negative elements of it. And I thought myself in circles trying to move on from that resistant space. But I read one quote, and as you say, what resonates with you, what tweaks you. I read this one quote by Marcus Aurelius, and it changed my life. It allowed me to put a full stop at the end of that first marriage and move on with no attachment to the emotional space. That quote, I've got it framed on my wall because it's so powerful. Choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been. That's absolute choice. You are choosing how you feel. You are choosing to interpret a certain set of circumstances to mean something to you. But if you choose to not do that, you won't do that.
Julie, I'm not going to wrap up.
Oh,
I think that that's a beautiful, beautiful ending for this podcast. I think that that really summarises exactly what we're talking about here, that you've got freedom of choice here, or that choice gives you freedom, and that we get to choose the meaning that we make. We get to analyse what that means. And if we get to the root cause of what's holding us stuck, it's probably an attachment to either things or an identity or a way that we think it's supposed to be. But actually, freedom comes from realising that we can choose a different pathway.
beautifully said. Oh, gosh, what a reflective session it's been. Thank you so much, Shannyn.
It has been a reflective session. Thank you, Julie. I feel that normally we end on a high note. I feel that this is ending on a very poignant note.
I feel like sitting back and having a scotch and contemplating life. It's only 10 past 2 in the afternoon. I don't think it'd look good.
No judgment.
After 12, whatever. Well, I look forward to catching up with you next time, Shannyn.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks, listeners. Catch you later.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.